Sometimes the smallest moments carry the greatest power to change everything. Sometimes it takes just one person refusing to be diminished to remind us all what dignity looks like. Amina Clarke worked nights at Seattle's Grand Meridian Hotel, quietly enduring the daily indignities that came with serving people who looked right through her. She was a single mother doing honest work, invisible to most guests who saw only her uniform. But tonight, when Dubai billionaire Karim Al-Hussein decided to publicly humiliate her with a string of Arabic insults, assuming she couldn't understand a word, he made a terrible mistake. Amina's grandfather had been an Egyptian scholar, and she had once walked those same academic halls before life took a different turn. Her response in perfect classical Arabic didn't just shock him into silence. It opened a door neither of them expected. What happens when two broken people discover grace in the most unlikely moment? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the pre-dawn darkness of Amina Clarke's modest Capitol Hill apartment. 5:30 in the morning, same as every day for the past 3 years. She reached over to silence it before it could wake Marcus. Though at 17, her son had grown into the kind of deep sleeper that could probably sleep through a fire alarm. The thought made her smile as she padded quietly to the kitchen, her bare feet finding the familiar path through their small but carefully maintained home. The apartment wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living area that doubled as her home office when she balanced the household accounts or helped Marcus with college applications. But every surface told a story of intentional choices made within tight constraints. Books lined makeshift shelves, fashioned from boards and concrete. Blocks, their spines revealing an eclectic collection that spoke to deeper interests than her current circumstances might suggest. Classical literature sat beside contemporary fiction, philosophy texts neighbored poetry collections, and scattered throughout were volumes in Arabic, beautiful leather-bound books that seemed almost out of place in the modest setting. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Amina pulled eggs from the refrigerator, mentally calculating how many meals she could stretch from the groceries she'd bought 3 days ago. Not poverty exactly, but the kind of careful budgeting that had become second nature to a single mother working her way through life, one paycheck at a time. She cracked 2 eggs into a bowl, whisking them with practiced efficiency while her mind wandered to the conversation she'd had with Marcus the night before. "Mom, I got the information packet from University of Washington," he'd said, his voice carrying that mixture of excitement and apprehension that had become familiar as college deadlines approached. "The engineering program looks incredible, but..." The "but" hung in the air between them, heavy with implications they both understood. Marcus was brilliant, had been since elementary school when teachers started using words like gifted and exceptional. But brilliance didn't pay tuition bills. She'd seen the numbers, done the math in her head while he talked about laboratories and research opportunities. Even with financial aid, even with the modest college fund she'd been building for years, the gap between dreams and reality remained, stubbornly wide. "We'll figure it out," she'd told him, the same phrase she'd been using since he was small and asked why they couldn't afford the things other families seemed to take for granted. "We always do." The eggs sizzled as they hit the pan, and she heard Marcus's bedroom door creak open. He emerged, looking lanky and sleep-rumpled, his father's height evident in the way he had to duck slightly under the doorframe, though everything else about him, the thoughtful eyes, the quick smile, the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence, reminded her of herself at that age. "Morning, Mom," he said, settling into one of the 2 chairs at their small dining table. "You don't have to keep making me breakfast, you know. I'm perfectly capable of pouring cereal." "I know you are," she replied, sliding half the eggs onto his plate, But I like our morning routine. Once you're off at college, I'll have plenty of time to eat cereal alone." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of shared early mornings and mutual respect. Marcus had never been a typical teenager, too aware of their circumstances, too considerate of his mother's sacrifices to indulge in the usual adolescent rebellion. Sometimes Amina worried he'd grown up too fast, become too responsible, too young. But watching him now, methodically eating his breakfast while reviewing notes for a calculus test, she felt nothing but pride. "I'll be home late tonight," she said, gathering their dishes. "Mrs. Rodriguez asked if I could cover her shift at the hotel, double time for working Sunday night." Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken mathematics. Extra money meant a little more breathing room, maybe enough to buy the books he'd need for spring semester at community college, while they figured out the bigger questions about his future. After he left for school, Amina allowed herself 30 minutes with her grandfather's journal, a ritual she'd maintained since his death 5 years earlier. The leather binding was worn soft from handling, the pages yellow with age, but the Arabic script remained crisp and beautiful. Her grandfather, Khalil Mansour, had been a linguistics professor at Brooklyn College before retiring, and his journal contained a lifetime's collection of poetry, observations, and wisdom written in the classical Arabic he'd taught her as a child. She traced her finger along a familiar verse from Rumi. "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself." The words offered comfort during moments when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming, when she wondered if the choices she'd made, dropping out of graduate school when she got pregnant, moving across the country to escape Marcus's father's family's disapproval, building a life from nothing, had been worth the sacrifice. Her reflection was interrupted by the need to prepare for her evening shift. She showered and dressed carefully, understanding that presentation mattered in the hospitality industry. The Grand Meridian Hotel catered to a clientele accustomed to perfection in every detail, from the thread count of the sheets to the polish on the concierge's shoes. Her uniform, navy blazer, crisp white shirt, understated jewelry, was as much a costume as practical clothing, designed to project competence and reliability while remaining appropriately invisible. The commute to downtown Seattle took 45 minutes by bus, time she used to read or sometimes to simply watch the city pass by her window. Seattle had been kind to her and Marcus, offering opportunities that might not have existed elsewhere. The hotel job paid reasonably well, came with health insurance, and allowed her a schedule flexible enough to be present for the important moments in her son's life. She'd worked her way up from housekeeping to the front desk, earning respect through consistency and quiet professionalism. The Grand Meridian rose 37 stories above Pike Street, its glass and steel facade reflecting the gray Seattle sky. The lobby was a study in understated luxury, marble floors, rich wood paneling, fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Amina had long since stopped being intimidated by the opulence. Instead, she'd learned to appreciate the craftsmanship, the attention to detail that created an environment where people paid premium prices for the experience of being treated as if their comfort mattered above all else. Her shift began with the usual briefing from David Davidson, the hotel manager, a kind man in his 60s who'd taken a chance on promoting her from housekeeping 3 years earlier. Tonight's guest list included a tech conference after-party in the ballroom, a pharmaceutical executives' dinner in the private dining room, and the usual collection of business travelers and tourists who could afford to stay in one of Seattle's premier hotels. "We have a new VIP checking in around 9, Davidson mentioned, consulting his tablet. Karim Al-Hussein, some sort of real estate mogul from Dubai, penthouse suite, extended stay. His assistant called twice to confirm the specific bottled water and preference and thread count requirements." He rolled his eyes slightly, a gesture he allowed himself only with staff he trusted. You know the type. Amina nodded. She did know the type. In 3 years of night desk duty, she'd encountered her share of demanding guests who confused wealth with wisdom, who treated hotel staff as if they were furniture, present when needed, invisible otherwise. She'd learned to navigate these interactions with professional grace, understanding that difficult guests were often dealing with their own pressures and insecurities. Kill them with kindness, her grandfather used to say. It confused them and sometimes transformed them. The evening proceeded smoothly through its predictable rhythms. Check-ins and check-outs, restaurant reservations and wake-up call requests, the occasional crisis that required diplomatic problem-solving. A pharmaceutical executive's wife was dissatisfied with her room's view, resolved by offering a complimentary upgrade. A tech conference attendee needed emergency dry cleaning for a presentation the next morning, handled with a call to the hotel's preferred vendor who offered after-hours service. Around 10:30, as the lobby traffic slowed to its overnight pace, Amina noticed the increased activity around the main entrance. Security personnel positioned themselves discreetly. The head of housekeeping made a final check of the penthouse floor, and Davidson appeared from his office looking alert and slightly apprehensive. The guest who commanded such attention arrived at 10:47 in a convoy of luxury vehicles that seemed excessive for one person's transportation needs. Through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, Amina watched as a small army of assistants and security personnel organized the unloading of an impressive amount of luggage. At the center of the orchestrated chaos stood a man who radiated the kind of presence that came from never having to wait for anything or anyone. Karim Al-Hussein was probably in his mid-40s, tall and impeccably dressed in what was clearly a custom-tailored suit. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His posture spoke of someone accustomed to command, and even from a distance, Amina could sense the aura of wealth and authority that preceded him into the lobby like an invisible force field. She straightened her blazer and checked her appearance in the decorative mirror behind the front desk, preparing for what would likely be a challenging interaction. VIP guests often arrived with heightened expectations and shortened patience, especially after long international flights. Her job was to ensure his transition from travel mode to luxury accommodation happened seamlessly, even if he proved difficult. As the entourage approached the front desk, Amina's trained eye catalogued details that might prove useful. The man's expression suggested barely controlled irritation, whether from travel fatigue or some other source wasn't yet clear. His assistants moved around him with the careful choreography of people who knew their boss's moods and preferred not to trigger them. One carried a phone that seemed to ring constantly. Another managed an expensive leather briefcase with the reverent care usually reserved for religious artifacts. "Good evening, Mr. Al-Hussein," she said, as he approached the desk, her voice professionally warm. "Welcome to the Grand Meridian. I'm Amina, and I'll be taking care of your check-in this evening." He looked at her as if surprised to find a human being behind the desk, rather than an automated system designed solely for his convenience. His eyes, dark and currently narrowed with some private frustration, swept over her face and uniform before settling into the kind of distant assessment she'd learned to recognize in demanding guests. "I hope the arrangements have been made according to my assistant's specifications," he said, his accent cultured and precise. "I've had quite enough complications for one day." "Of course, sir. Everything has been prepared exactly as requested." She pulled up his reservation on the computer, noting the extensive list of preferences and requirements. The penthouse suite has been stocked with Evian water. The temperature has been set to 72 degrees, and housekeeping has used the Egyptian cotton linens you specified. As she spoke, managing the check-in process with practiced efficiency, Amina found herself studying this man, who required such elaborate arrangements simply to sleep in unfamiliar surroundings. There was something in his bearing that suggested recent stress, the kind that came from situations beyond one's control rather than mere travel inconvenience. His expensive watch, she noticed, showed Dubai time rather than local Seattle time, suggesting either recent arrival or a reluctance to fully commit to being present in his current location. The check-in proceeded without incident until the moment. She handed him his key cards, sleek black rectangles encoded with access to Seattle's most expensive hotel suite. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, and she caught a glimpse of something unexpected in his expression, a flicker of recognition, as if he'd suddenly noticed her as an individual rather than a service provider. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying a tone she hadn't heard from him before, less imperious, more genuinely polite. "I appreciate your efficiency." "You're welcome, Mr. Al-Hussein. If you need anything during your stay, please don't hesitate to call the front desk. We're here 24 hours a day." He nodded, gathering his key cards and turning toward the elevator bank where his assistants waited with the luggage cart. As he walked away, Amina allowed herself a moment of reflection on the encounter. Not the most difficult guest she'd handled, certainly not the most pleasant, but something about the brief interaction lingered in her mind as she returned to her other duties. She had no way of knowing that within 24 hours, this same man would test every principle her grandfather had taught her about grace under pressure, or that their paths would intertwine in ways neither could have imagined. For now, he was simply another wealthy guest who would occupy the penthouse suite for however long his business required, then disappear back to his world of private jets and international real estate deals. The rest of her shift passed quietly, with only the usual late-night requests and the comforting routine of preparing the front desk for the morning shift. As she gathered her purse and prepared to leave at 6 a.m., Amina felt the familiar satisfaction that came from another night of professional service rendered without incident. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight had been a success. By any reasonable measure, she had no way of knowing that tomorrow night would redefine everything she thought she understood about dignity, grace, and the unexpected places where life's most important lessons could be found. The storm that hit Seattle the following evening arrived with the kind of theatrical drama that seemed designed to test everyone's patience. Rain hammered against the Grand Meridian's windows in sheets so thick they transformed the city beyond into abstract impressions of light and shadow. Wind howled between the downtown buildings, with enough force to rattle even the hotel's reinforced glass, and the temperature had dropped 15 degrees since afternoon, catching everyone unprepared for the sudden shift from mild autumn weather to something that felt more like early winter's warning shot. Amina arrived for her shift 30 minutes early, her hair damp despite the umbrella she'd wrestled with during the walk from the bus stop. The lobby felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos outside, warm, dry, softly lit, with the usual evening arrangements of fresh flowers providing spots of color against the storm's grey monotony. But even inside, she could feel the weather's effect on the atmosphere. Guests moved through the space with the hurried energy of people eager to reach their destinations and stay there. "Nasty night out there," commented James Morrison, the evening security supervisor, as she settled in behind the front desk. Already had 2 fender benders in the parking structure and a delivery truck that couldn't make it up the hill on Pine Street. Through the main windows, she could see the hotel's valets struggling with umbrellas that turned inside out the moment they stepped outside. The covered drop-off area provided some protection, but guests still arrived looking harried and soaked despite the brief distance from car to door. It was the kind of weather that brought out either the best or worst in people. Some became more understanding and patient, while others seemed to interpret every minor inconvenience as a personal affront. At 9:15, she noticed increased activity near the main entrance. The head valet, Roberto, was speaking urgently into his radio while gesturing toward the street. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could make out the approaching headlights of what appeared to be the same convoy of luxury vehicles that had delivered Karim Al-Hussein the night before. The difference tonight was immediately apparent. Where? Yesterday's arrival had been orchestrated and controlled. Tonight felt chaotic and charged with tension. The lead vehicle, a sleek black Bentley, pulled up to the drop-off with more speed than the weather conditions really warranted. Before the valets could position themselves properly, the driver's door flew open and Karim Al-Hussein emerged into the storm. Even from her position behind the front desk, Amina could see that something had changed dramatically in the 24 hours since his arrival. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his entire bearing radiated the kind of barely controlled fury that comes from a day when everything has gone catastrophically wrong. He strode toward the hotel entrance, without waiting for assistance, leaving his driver and security detail to manage the logistics. The trouble began before he even reached the lobby doors. Roberto, the head valet, had rushed out to assist with the vehicle, and in his haste to provide good service during the challenging weather conditions, he misjudged the angle of approach to the Bentley's driver's side. The sound of metal scraping against metal was audible even over the storm's noise, a brief but unmistakable contact between Roberto's belt buckle and the car's pristine paint job. The mark it left was minor. Barely noticeable scratch that could probably be buffed out by any decent detailing service. But for a man clearly already at the end of his patience, it became the final straw that broke whatever restraint he'd been maintaining. "What the hell is wrong with you people?" Karim's voice cut through the lobby's genteel atmosphere like a knife through silk. His accent, which had seemed cultured and refined the night before, now carried edges sharp enough to draw blood. "Do you have any idea what this vehicle costs? Do you understand the level of incompetence I'm dealing with?"
Tonight?
Roberto, a grandfather of 4 who'd worked at the hotel for 12 years without a single customer complaint, stood frozen in the rain, looking stricken. Other guests in the lobby turned to stare, their conversations faltering as they witnessed what was clearly becoming an ugly scene. Amina rose from her chair behind the front desk, her professional instincts kicking in. De-escalation was part of her job, and she'd handled similar situations before, wealthy guests taking out their frustrations on staff who had no control over whatever had really triggered their anger. The key was to acknowledge their concerns, while protecting her colleagues from abuse, finding a way to redirect the guest's energy toward constructive solutions. "Mr. Al-Hussein," she said, moving around the desk toward him with calm authority, "I can see you've had a difficult evening. Why don't we step inside where it's dry, and I'll help you resolve this situation?" He turned toward her, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes that gave her pause. Not just anger, but something deeper and more painful. Disappointment, perhaps, or the kind of hurt that comes from betrayal. But before she could process that observation fully, his expression hardened into something much colder. "Don't presume to understand my evening," he said, his voice dropping to a level that was somehow more menacing than his earlier shouting. "And don't treat me like a child having a tantrum. I'm dealing with incompetence at every level tonight, starting with that fool who just damaged my property." "I understand you're frustrated," Amina replied, maintaining her professional tone despite the insult. "Accidents happen, especially in weather like this. I'm sure we can arrange for the car to be repaired at the hotel's expense. And accidents?" He stepped closer, and she could smell expensive cologne mixed with the stress sweat that came from a very bad day. "This isn't about accidents. This is about standards. This is about the complete inability of people like you to understand what excellence actually means." The phrase "people like you" hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made several nearby guests shift uncomfortably. Amina felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear exactly, but recognition of a familiar pattern. She'd encountered this before. The assumption that her race, her gender, her working-class job meant she was somehow lesser than the person speaking to her. But instead of backing down or escalating the confrontation, she drew on the lessons her grandfather had taught her about dignity in the face of ignorance. "Mr. Al-Hussein," she said quietly, "I understand you're having a difficult time, but I need to ask that you speak respectfully to our staff. We're here to help you, but we can't do that effectively if—" Respectfully. The word seemed to trigger something explosive in him. His voice rose again, but this time he switched languages, unleashing a torrent of Arabic that was clearly intended to be both insulting and incomprehensible to everyone listening. The specific words he used were chosen for maximum cruelty. هذه المرة الجاهلة لا تفهم شيئا. كيف يمكنها أن تكلمني وهي مجرد كلمة لا تعرف مكانها في هذه الحياة? The translation, had anyone in the lobby understood it, would have been devastating. This ignorant woman understands nothing. How dare she speak to me when she's just a servant who doesn't know her place in this life? The Arabic flowed from him with the fluency of a native speaker, each syllable precisely articulated and heavy with contempt. He seemed to take satisfaction in the confusion that crossed the faces of everyone listening, the sense that he was expressing things they couldn't comprehend or challenge because they lacked the linguistic tools to understand what was being said. What he didn't expect was the quality of silence that followed his outburst. Not the uncomfortable quiet of people witnessing an awkward scene, but something deeper and more charged. The kind of silence that occurs when assumptions are about to be shattered. Amina stood perfectly still for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and measured, but it carried a resonance that seemed to change the very air in the room. "Inna al-karama wa al-ihtiram laysa lahuma alaka bil-mal aw al-mansib," she said, her classical Arabic flawless and beautiful. "Al-sharaf al-haqiqi ya'ti min kayfiyyat mu'amalat al-nas li ba'dihim al-ba'd, wa laysa min hajat al-insan li idlal al-akharin li yakun yara nafsahu kabiran." The translation of her response would have been, "Dignity and respect have no relationship to money or position. True honor comes from how people treat each other, not from a person's need to diminish others in order to see himself as great." The effect on Karim was immediate and devastating. The color drained from his face as if someone had pulled a plug, and he took an involuntary step backward. Around the lobby, guests who had been watching the confrontation with embarrassed fascination now stood transfixed, sensing that something significant had just occurred, even if they couldn't understand the specifics. Moreover, Amina continued still in Arabic, but now quoting directly from classical poetry. As the great Al-Mutanabi wrote, "The noble-hearted are easily wounded by words, but the mean-spirited feel no pain from insults because they have no honor to wound." She paused, allowing the words to settle, then switched back to English with devastating grace. "Your Arabic is quite good, Mr. Al-Hussein, but your manners could use some work. Now shall we discuss how to properly address the situation with your vehicle, or would you prefer to continue demonstrating your linguistic skills to our other guests?" The lobby had gone completely silent, except for the sound of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Even the usual background noise of the hotel, conversations, footsteps, the soft chiming of elevators, seemed to have paused in recognition of the moment that had just unfolded. Karim Al-Hussein, a man accustomed to having the last word in every interaction, stood speechless in the middle of Seattle's most prestigious hotel lobby, his assumptions about the woman in front of him completely shattered. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, he had encountered someone who had not only understood his cruelty, but had responded with a dignity that made his behavior seem small and petty by comparison. Without another word, He turned and walked toward the elevators, his entourage scrambling to follow. The lobby remained quiet until the elevator doors closed behind him, and then conversations resumed in hushed, wondering tones. Amina returned to her position behind the front desk, her hands steady as she resumed her work. But inside, she was trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and something else. A sense that she had just crossed a bridge she couldn't uncross, had revealed something about herself that had been hidden for years. She had no way of knowing. That upstairs in his penthouse suite, Karim Al-Hussein was staring out at the storm-lashed city, replaying every word of their exchange and beginning to question everything he thought he understood about the woman who had just taught him a lesson. In Grace Under Fire, sleep eluded Karim Al-Hussein that night, as completely as if it were a business deal he'd lost to a more skillful competitor. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse suite, Seattle's skyline stretched out before him like a circuit board of lights, and replayed the evening's events with the obsessive attention to detail that had made him successful in real estate acquisitions across 3 continents. But this wasn't a deal gone wrong, or a negotiation that had taken an unexpected turn. This was something far more unsettling, a moment when his fundamental assumptions about the world had been challenged by a woman whose existence he had dismissed until she opened her mouth and spoke words that cut through his arrogance like a blade through expensive silk. The Arabic she had used wasn't the casual conversational variety he might have expected from someone with basic language skills. It was classical, formal, the kind taught in universities and used in diplomatic circles. Her pronunciation had been flawless, her choice of words sophisticated, and her quotation from Al-Mutanabi had demonstrated not just linguistic ability, but deep cultural knowledge. She hadn't simply understood his insults, she had responded with poetry that reframed his cruelty as evidence of his own spiritual poverty. By 3 in the morning, he found himself at his laptop, searching for information about Amina Clarke. What he discovered only deepened his confusion, and if he was honest with himself, his shame. Her LinkedIn profile, buried under privacy settings but accessible to someone with his resources, revealed an academic background that made his assumptions seem not just wrong, but willfully ignorant. She had graduated summa cum laude from Columbia University with a degree in Middle Eastern Studies, had begun graduate work in comparative linguistics at the University of Washington, and had published 2 papers on the evolution of classical Arabic in contemporary literature. The timeline suggested she had been working on her doctoral dissertation when something had interrupted her academic career. Around the same time, he noted that her son would have been born. The photograph accompanying her graduate school records showed a younger version of the woman who had stood in that lobby with such quiet authority. Same intelligent eyes, same composed bearing, but wearing the kind of confident smile that came from someone whose future seemed full of intellectual possibilities. What had happened to redirect that promise toward night shift work at a hotel? As dawn broke over the city, Karim remained at his desk, staring at printouts of academic articles and trying to reconcile the scholar in these papers with the uniformed woman who had diffused his tantrum with such devastating grace. The cognitive dissonance was making him physically uncomfortable, a sensation he hadn't experienced since childhood, when his father had caught him lying about something trivial and made him confront the gap between his words and his actions. He had built his fortune on the ability to assess people quickly and accurately, to understand their motivations and leverage their weaknesses. Real estate development, particularly at the international level, required reading personalities as precisely as reading market trends. But last night, he had completely misread someone whose dignity and intelligence had been evident to anyone. And paying attention, the question that haunted him was, what else was he missing in his daily interactions with the world? At 7:30, after 2 hours of false starts, he finally managed to write a note that felt adequate to the situation. "Ms. Clarke," it began, his handwriting more careful than usual. "I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than words can express. My behavior last evening was inexcusable, and your response was a lesson in grace that I clearly needed to learn. I have no excuse for my rudeness, except to say that personal pressures do not justify taking one's frustrations out on others, particularly those who are trying to help. I hope you will accept my sincere apologies, not just for the incident itself, but for the assumptions I made about you. Your dignity in the face of my poor behavior says everything about your character and nothing flattering about mine. With deepest respect, Karim Al-Hussein." Below his signature, he added a line in Arabic, a verse from the same poet she had quoted. "True nobility lies in being superior to your former self, not in being superior to others." He sealed the note in hotel stationery and left it at the front desk, with instructions that it be given to Amina when she arrived for her shift. Then he spent the day alternately trying to focus on business calls and finding himself distracted by memories of her calm voice speaking words that had stopped. His tantrum cold. Meanwhile, across the city, Amina was discovering that word of the previous night's incident had somehow preceded her home. Marcus was waiting in the kitchen when she arrived, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity that she recognized from the years when he had been small enough to need protection, but too young to understand the complexities of adult interactions. "Mom," he said, looking up from the calculus homework spread across their small dining table. "Mrs. Chen from downstairs said she heard something on the news about an incident at your hotel last night. Something about a guest and—" "Nothing for you to worry about," she interrupted gently, hanging up her coat and moving to start the coffee maker. "Just a difficult guest who was having a bad evening. It happens sometimes in hospitality work." But Marcus had inherited both his mother's intelligence and her ability to read between lines. "Were you okay? Did someone treat you badly?" The protective note in his 17-year-old voice made her turn to face him fully. He had grown tall over the past year, his frame filling out with the kind of lean muscle that came from after-school basketball and genetics that had given him his father's height. But his eyes were hers, thoughtful, observant, and currently filled with the kind of concern that made her heart ache with love and pride. "I handled it," she said simply. "Someone made assumptions about me that turned out to be wrong, and I was able to correct those assumptions. Sometimes that's the best we can do, respond to ignorance with knowledge and cruelty with dignity." Marcus studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Grandpa Khalil's lessons?" "Grandpa Khalil's lessons," she confirmed. They shared a smile that carried years of understanding. Her grandfather's wisdom had been a constant presence in their household, his sayings and stories forming a foundation that had helped them navigate challenges from Marcus's difficult middle school years to the financial pressures that seemed to multiply as college approached. That evening, when Amina arrived at the Grand Meridian, she found the sealed envelope waiting for her with her name. Written in careful script, the note inside surprised her, not just because someone like Karim Al-Hussein had taken the time to write a personal apology, but because of the depth of reflection it demonstrated. The Arabic verse he had included was particularly meaningful, suggesting he had taken her words to heart in a way she hadn't expected. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her blazer pocket. It didn't erase the insult or the public nature of his behavior, but it represented something she encountered rarely in her work: genuine accountability from someone who had acted poorly. The next several days passed in a curious dance of near encounters and careful avoidance. She would catch glimpses of him in the lobby or heading toward the elevators, always impeccably dressed and attended by his usual entourage of assistants and security personnel. But their paths didn't cross directly, and she began to think the incident would simply fade into the collection of difficult guest stories that hotel workers accumulated over the years. Then, on Thursday evening, she discovered a book in the hotel's small library, a leather-bound collection of Sufi poetry that hadn't been there the week before. It was open to a particular poem about forgiveness and second chances, with a bookmark placed at a verse that seemed to speak directly to their situation. The wound is the place where the light enters you. The book was expensive, the kind of edition that belonged in a private collection rather than a hotel's public space. But there was no card, no identifying information, just the careful placement and the meaningful bookmark that suggested intentional gifting by someone who understood both literature and the delicate nature of reconciliation. Amina found herself reading the marked passages during her break, surprised by the thoughtfulness of the gesture and beginning to reconsider her assumptions about the man who had initially seemed like just another entitled guest with anger management issues. The accidental encounter happened on a Tuesday night when both insomnia and circumstance conspired to bring two people together in the Grand Meridian's empty lobby at 3 in the morning. Amina had been dealing with a medical emergency, an elderly guest experiencing chest pains who needed immediate attention and careful coordination with paramedics. By the time the situation was resolved and the guest safely transported to Swedish Medical Center, the lobby had settled into its usual overnight quiet. She was finishing her incident report when she became aware of someone else in the space. Karim Al-Hussein sat in one of the leather armchairs near the large windows, still dressed in business attire despite the late hour, staring out at the city with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was seeing something more complex than Seattle's sleeping skyline. For a moment, she considered retreating to the front desk and allowing him his privacy. Their interactions since the confrontation had been limited to professional courtesies, polite nods when they crossed paths, formal exchanges about hotel services that carefully avoided any reference to their shared history. But something in his posture, a quality of solitude that seemed less chosen than endured, made her reconsider. "Trouble sleeping?" she asked quietly, approaching with the careful respect one might show to a wounded animal. He turned at the sound of her voice, and she was struck by how different he looked in the soft lobby lighting. The harsh edges of stress and anger that had defined their first real encounter had been replaced by something more vulnerable, exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind that came from carrying burdens that couldn't be set down, even temporarily. "Sleep and I have been having philosophical disagreements lately," he replied, and there was something in his tone that suggested he was as surprised by her approach as she was by her own decision to initiate conversation. "I hope I'm not disturbing your work." "Not at all. I was just finishing up some paperwork." She gestured toward the chair opposite him. "May I sit? It's been a long night." He nodded, and she settled into the chair, noting how the usual tension that had characterized their previous interactions seemed absent in the quiet intimacy of the nearly empty space. Something about the late hour and the soft lighting created an atmosphere that felt separate from the formal dynamics of guest and hotel employee. "I wanted to thank you for the book," she said. "The poetry collection in the library. It was a thoughtful gesture. You recognized it was from me. Not many of our guests leave first edition roomy in the library with bookmarks at poems about redemption." She smiled slightly. "And the Arabic inscription on the title page was something of a clue." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I wasn't sure how else to. I wanted to do something that acknowledged your response to my behavior without assuming you would want to speak with me directly." "It was elegant," she said simply, "and the poems you marked were beautiful. My grandfather would have appreciated both the sentiment and the quality of the translation." "Your grandfather was the scholar? The one who taught you Arabic?" She nodded. Khalil Mansour. He came to Brooklyn from Cairo in the 1960s to teach at the college there. He believed that language was a bridge between cultures, not a weapon to be used against people. The gentle reproach in her words wasn't lost on him, but it was delivered with such kindness that it felt more like teaching than punishment. "I researched your background," he said quietly, after our encounter. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I needed to understand how wrong my assumptions had been." "And what did you discover?" "That I had dismissed someone whose academic credentials exceed those of most of my business associates. That you had given up a promising career in comparative linguistics to raise your son. That my behavior toward you wasn't just rude. It was ignorant on a level that should have embarrassed me more than it initially did." Amina was quiet for a moment, processing not just his words, but the tone in which they were delivered. This wasn't the performative apology of someone trying to manage their reputation, but the genuine reflection of a person who had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. "You said you had been having a difficult day," she said. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Karim was silent for so long that she began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that explained some of the anger she had witnessed. "My business partner of 15 years, someone I trusted completely, had just informed me that he had been systematically embezzling from our joint ventures. Not just money, but enough money to threaten everything we had built together. The phone call came while I was in the car, driving through that storm to get here. I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Betrayal by someone close to you is one of the worst kinds of pain." "It is. But that doesn't excuse taking my anger out on innocent people, particularly people who were trying to help me. My wife used to say that how a person treats service workers reveals their true character. I failed that test spectacularly that night." The mention of his wife was casual, but carried an undertone that made Amina look at him more closely. "Used to say?" "She died 2 years ago. Cancer." The words came out flat, rehearsed, the way people spoke about losses they had been forced to explain too many times. "Everything since then has been difficult to navigate. I'm sorry for your loss," Amina said softly. "Grief and anger often travel together, especially when other stresses pile on top." "Is that your professional assessment or personal experience?" "Personal. Marcus's father died when he was 10. Not cancer, a car accident, but the aftermath was similar. Anger at the unfairness of it. Frustration with a world that expected you to function normally when your foundation had been destroyed." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the weight of shared understanding settling between them. Outside, Seattle's streets were empty except for the occasional taxi or late-night delivery truck, their headlights creating moving patterns of light and shadow against the lobby's windows. "Your son," Karim said eventually. "He's applying to colleges, University of Washington, hopefully. He wants to study engineering." Pride and worry competed in her voice. "He's brilliant, but brilliant doesn't pay tuition bills." "Financial aid? Some. Not enough." She shrugged, the gesture carrying years of practiced acceptance of limitations. "We'll figure it out. We always." "Degree, what was your doctoral dissertation about before life redirected your path?" "The influence of classical Arabic poetry on contemporary cross-cultural communication. Specifically, how understanding the literary traditions behind everyday expressions could improve diplomatic relations between Arabic-speaking nations and the West." "That's remarkably relevant to current international relations." It was. 15 years ago when I was researching it, and even more so now. There was no bitterness in her voice, just the quiet acceptance of someone who had made peace with roads not taken. "But Marcus needed me more than the academic world needed another dissertation." "Do you ever regret the choice?" She considered the question seriously. I regret the circumstances that made it necessary. I regret that I couldn't find a way to do both. But I don't regret choosing my son over my career. Some decisions, once you make them, become part of who you are. You can't unmake them without unmaking yourself. That's very wise. That's very tired, she said with a slight smile. When you've been a single parent for 7 years, you develop philosophies to help you sleep at night. Karim found himself studying her face in the soft lobby lighting, noting details he had missed during their previous encounters. The intelligence in her eyes, obviously, but also a quality of strength that came from having weathered difficulties and emerged with her essential kindness intact. She was, he realized, one of the most genuinely dignified people he had ever met. Not dignity as performance or social positioning, but as an inherent quality of character. I extended my stay here indefinitely, he said. My business troubles are going to require several months to resolve, and Seattle seems like a reasonable place to establish temporary headquarters. The hotel will appreciate the extended booking. That wasn't entirely why I mentioned it. She looked at him questioningly, and he found himself struggling with an unfamiliar vulnerability. I would like, if you're willing, to continue these conversations, not as guest and hotel employee, but as two people who have discovered they have more in common than either initially expected. Amina was quiet for a moment, considering not just his words but their implications. Getting personally involved with hotel guests, particularly wealthy and complicated ones, violated several professional boundaries she had maintained carefully throughout her career. But there was something in his request that seemed genuine, not the casual interest of someone looking for entertainment, but the tentative hope of someone who had found an unexpected connection in a period of personal difficulty. I work nights, she said finally. My schedule doesn't leave much time for social interactions. I understand. But perhaps these late-night conversations, when you have breaks and I can't sleep anyway, no pressure, no expectations beyond the pleasure of talking with someone whose perspective I've come to value. She nodded slowly. I think that might be acceptable, as long as we both understand that this is friendship, nothing more complicated. Of course, he said, though something in his expression suggested he was hoping for exactly the kind of complications she was determined to avoid. Over the following weeks, their late-night conversations in the Grand Meridian's lobby became a ritual that both looked forward to with an intensity that surprised them. Karim would appear around midnight, always carrying a book or tablet, settling into what had become his usual chair near the windows. Amina would join him during her breaks, bringing coffee from the hotel's always brewing pot and the kind of intellectual conversation that had been absent from both their lives for too long. These weren't the careful, polite exchanges between guest and employee that had characterized their early interactions. Instead, they found themselves discussing literature, philosophy, current events, and personal histories, with the kind of openness that usually developed over months or years of friendship. There was something about the empty lobby's intimacy and the late hours' honesty that made deeper revelations feel natural. I brought something to show you, Karim said one Thursday night, reaching into his jacket pocket to withdraw a small, leather-bound photograph. The picture showed a beautiful woman with intelligent dark eyes and a radiant smile, standing in what appeared to be a garden filled with jasmine and rose bushes. Layla, Amina said softly, recognizing without being told that this was his late wife. Our garden in Dubai. She designed it herself, spent 2 years researching plants that would thrive in the desert climate while still creating the kind of lush beauty she remembered from her childhood in Lebanon. His voice carried the particular tenderness that came from talking about someone whose memory remained vivid and precious. She was beautiful. She was brilliant, he said, and Amina could hear both love and loss in the correction. A physician, pediatric, oncology. She spent her days helping children fight cancer, then came home and transformed our courtyard into something that looked like paradise. I used to joke that she could make anything grow, even in the most hostile environment, including you. The question slipped out before Amina could censor it, and she immediately worried it was too personal, too presumptuous. But Karim smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she had seen from him. Especially me. When we met, I was exactly the kind of arrogant, workaholic businessman you encountered that first night, successful but not particularly pleasant to be around. She saw something in me that I didn't even know existed. What changed you? Her patience, mainly, and her complete inability to be impressed by the things I thought mattered: money, status, business accomplishments. She cared about who I was, when no one was watching, how I treated people who couldn't do anything for me, whether I was becoming the kind of man she could respect as well as love. Amina found herself studying the photograph more closely, noting details that spoke to the woman's character. The way she was looking at the camera, or more likely at Karim behind the camera, with obvious affection and amusement. The simple elegance of her clothing, the lack of ostentatious jewelry or designer labels that might have been expected from someone married to a wealthy man. She would have liked you, Karim said quietly. How can you know that? Because you have the same quality she did, the ability to see past surface presentations to what's actually important. That night when I was behaving so badly, you could have simply called security or found a way to placate me without engaging. Instead, you chose to respond with dignity and wisdom. That's exactly what Layla would have done. I'm not sure I deserve the comparison. I think you underestimate yourself. He took the photograph back, handling it with the careful reverence of someone touching a sacred object. Layla used to say that real strength wasn't about never being knocked down, but about how gracefully you got back up. From what I've learned about your life, that seems to describe you perfectly. The conversation moved to other topics. Marcus's college applications, Karim's business troubles, books they had both read, places they had traveled or hoped to visit. But the shared moment over Layla's photograph had shifted something between them, created a level of intimacy that felt both precious and dangerous. I should probably get back to work, Amina said eventually, glancing at the lobby clock that showed nearly 2 in the morning. Of course. But before you go, Marcus is 17. Almost 18. Why? I was wondering if he might be interested in visiting some of the colleges he's applying to. I have business in Los Angeles next month, and I know UCLA has an excellent engineering program. If he wanted to come along, see the campus, maybe sit in on some classes. Amina felt herself tensing, the way she always did when someone offered help that felt too generous, too complicated. That's very kind of you, but I couldn't possibly. It wouldn't be charity, Karim said quickly, recognizing her reaction. I travel with empty seats on the plane anyway, and I genuinely enjoy talking with intelligent young people. From what you've told me about him, he sounds like exactly the kind of person who would appreciate seeing his options firsthand. I don't know. Think about it. No pressure, no obligations, just an opportunity for a bright kid to see one of the country's top universities. As she walked back to the front desk, Amina found herself torn between gratitude and suspicion. Karim's offer seemed genuine, motivated by kindness, rather than any attempt to manipulate or obligate her. But accepting favors from wealthy men, particularly ones she was beginning to care about more than professionally appropriate, felt like stepping onto uncertain ground. The next morning, she mentioned the conversation to Marcus over breakfast, presenting it as casually as possible while watching his reaction carefully. He offered to take me to UCLA. Marcus's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement she hadn't seen since he'd received his SAT scores. Mom, that's incredible. UCLA's engineering program is ranked in the top 5 nationally. I haven't said yes, she warned. There are complications to consider. What kind of complications? How could she explain that she was beginning to have feelings for a guest that went beyond professional courtesy? That she was attracted to a man whose world was so different from theirs, that any relationship seemed doomed from the start? That accepting his generosity felt like the first step down a path she wasn't sure she was ready to walk? It's complicated. Honey, Mr. Al-Hussein is a nice man, but he's also a guest at the hotel where I work. There are professional boundaries to consider. Marcus studied her face with the kind of perceptive attention that reminded her how much he had grown up in the past few years. This is about more than professional boundaries, isn't it? What do you mean? Mom, I'm 17, not 7. I can see that you like this guy. And from the way you talk about your conversations, it sounds like he likes you too. It's not that simple. Why not? You're both adults. You clearly enjoy each other's company, and he's offering to help me see colleges because he cares about what happens to us. That sounds pretty simple to me. Because men like Karim Al-Hussein don't have relationships with women like me. We live in different worlds, Marcus. He's a billionaire who travels by private jet and stays in penthouse suites. I'm a night shift hotel employee who takes the bus to work and budgets grocery money. So, some of the best relationships are between people who complement each other's differences. Where did you get so wise about relationships? From watching you be alone for 7 years and wondering when you were going to let yourself be happy. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She had thought she was protecting him by not dating, by focusing entirely on his needs and their small family unit. It had never occurred to her that he might see her sacrifice differently, not as noble self-denial, but as a kind of self-imposed exile from possibilities that could bring joy to both their lives. The opportunity for Marcus to meet Karim arose sooner than expected, though not under circumstances Amina would have chosen. She was finishing her shift on a Friday morning when Marcus appeared in the Grand Meridian's lobby, looking uncharacteristically nervous and carrying his backpack with the careful attention that suggested something important inside. "Marcus, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in school?" "I wanted to deliver this in person," he said, pulling a thick envelope from his backpack. "My application to UW's engineering program. I thought maybe, since Mr. Al-Hussein offered to help, he might be willing to look at my personal statement. You know, give me feedback from someone who's been successful in business." Amina felt a mixture of pride and panic. Pride because her son had taken initiative to seek mentorship from someone whose opinion could genuinely help him. Panic because she hadn't yet decided how to handle Karim's growing presence in their lives, and Marcus's direct approach was forcing decisions she wasn't ready to make. "Honey, Mr. Al-Hussein is probably busy with his own work. We can't just assume." "Actually," came a familiar voice from behind them, "I'd be honored to look at Marcus's application materials." They turned to find Karim approaching from the elevator. Bank, dressed in his usual impeccable business attire, but wearing an expression of genuine pleasure at the unexpected meeting. His smile, Amina noticed, reached his eyes in a way that transformed his entire face from merely handsome to genuinely warm. "Mr. Al-Hussein," Marcus said, extending his hand with the kind of respectful confidence that made Amina's heart swell. With maternal pride, "I'm Marcus Clarke. My mum has told me a lot about your conversations." "All good things, I hope," Karim replied, shaking Marcus's hand and noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "Your mother speaks of you constantly, and always with tremendous pride. You're applying to the University of Washington?" "Engineering program, yes, sir. I brought my personal statement. I was hoping maybe you could give me some feedback from a business perspective." Karim glanced at Amina, clearly asking permission before engaging further with her son. She found herself nodding, curious despite her reservations to see how these two important people in her life would interact. "I'd be happy to take a look," Karim said. "Why don't we sit over here?" He gestured toward the comfortable seating area near the windows, where he and Amina had spent so many late-night hours in conversation. As Marcus pulled his application materials from his backpack, Amina watched the interaction with the kind of careful attention mothers reserve for situations where their children were being evaluated by important adults. But her worry proved unnecessary. Karim read Marcus's personal statement with obvious attention and respect, asking thoughtful questions about the young man's interests and goals. "This is impressive work," Karim said finally. "Your essay about using engineering to address climate change shows both technical understanding and social awareness. That's exactly the kind of perspective universities are looking for. Thank you, sir. But I'm worried it might not be enough. The competition is so intense and financially—" "Marcus," Amina said quietly, warning him away from discussing their financial limitations with someone who might feel obligated to offer help. But Karim seemed to understand the delicate nature of the conversation. "Competition is intense," he agreed, "but talent like yours finds a way to succeed. Universities need bright students like you. They invest in people they believe will make a difference in the world." "That's what I keep telling him," Amina said, settling into a chair beside them. "But he worries about the practical aspects." "Practical concerns are valid," Karim said seriously, addressing Marcus directly. "But they shouldn't prevent you from applying to the programs that best match your interests and abilities. Financial aid, scholarships, work-study programs. There are more options than you might realize." For the next hour, the three of them discussed Marcus's college plans, career interests, and the challenges facing young people entering engineering fields. Amina found herself relaxing as she watched her son and Karim develop an easy rapport based on genuine mutual respect rather than the stilted politeness she had feared. "I should let you both get back to your day," Karim said eventually. "But Marcus, I meant what I said about the UCLA visit. If you're interested, I'll be flying down there in 2 weeks. You could see the campus, maybe sit in on some classes, talk to professors and students about their programs." "That would be incredible," Marcus said, his excitement obvious. "But I couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering, and your mother raised you to be polite. But sometimes politeness gets in the way of opportunities that could change your life." After Marcus left for school, practically floating with excitement about the possibility of visiting UCLA, Amina found herself alone in the lobby with Karim. The morning rush of hotel guests had begun, but their corner felt separate from the activity, a private space for conversations that were becoming increasingly personal. "He's a remarkable young man," Karim said. "Intelligent, respectful, genuinely curious about the world. You should be very proud." "I am. But I'm also concerned about what accepting your help might mean. What do you think it means? I don't know, and that's the problem. Are you being kind to my son because you care about him? Or because you're trying to, I don't know, win points with me?" The directness of her question seemed to surprise him, but he considered it seriously before answering. "Both, probably. I do care about Marcus. Anyone who spent an hour talking with him would care about his future. But you're right that my feelings for you make me want to help your family." "Feelings for me? Amina, surely you've noticed that our friendship has become something more complicated than late-night conversations about literature." She had noticed, of course, the way their conversations had become the highlight of her work week. The way she found herself thinking about things he had said during her off hours, The way his smile could change her entire mood, and his absence from the lobby left her feeling oddly disappointed. "I've noticed," she said quietly, "but I'm not sure what we're supposed to do about it." "I'm not sure either. But I know I don't want to pretend these feelings don't exist, and I don't want to let fear of complications prevent us from exploring what might be possible." "Karim, we need to be realistic about this. You're going to resolve your business troubles eventually and return to Dubai. I'm going to continue working night shifts at this hotel and raising my son. Our lives are moving in completely different directions, are they? Or are we both so accustomed to limiting our possibilities that we can't see when circumstances might be changing?" Before she could respond, her replacement arrived for the day. Shift and the moment for deeper conversation passed, but his question lingered with her throughout the day, challenging assumptions she had made about what was realistic and what was possible. That evening, when she returned to work, she found a small package waiting for her, an antique compass in a beautiful wooden box, with a note written in Karim's careful handwriting. "For finding your true direction, even when the path seems uncertain. My father carried this from Palestine to Dubai in 1967, trusting that hard work and faith would lead him to a better life. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single step in an unexpected direction." The gift was clearly valuable, not just monetarily, but emotionally. The fact that he was sharing a family heirloom suggested a level of trust and intention that went far beyond casual friendship. As she held the compass, feeling its weight and imagining the history it carried, Amina realized she was standing at her own crossroads, faced with a choice between the safety of familiar limitations and the uncertain promise of unexpected possibilities. The news broke on a Tuesday morning when Amina was home sleeping after her night shift, and she might have missed it entirely if Marcus hadn't burst into her bedroom with his laptop, his face a mixture of excitement and concern that immediately told her something significant had happened. "Mom, you need to see this," he said, setting the computer on her bed and pointing to a news article from the Seattle Business Journal. The headline read, "Dubai real estate mogul Karim Al-Hussein under investigation for international fraud scheme." Amina sat up quickly, sleep disappearing as she read the article with growing disbelief and concern. According to the report, federal investigators had uncovered evidence of a massive embezzlement scheme involving Karim's business partnership with a man named Rashid Nazir. Millions of dollars had allegedly been diverted from joint development projects, with funds disappearing into offshore accounts and shell companies. But the most disturbing detail was buried in the third paragraph. Investigators suggested that Karim had been aware of the fraudulent activities and had possibly been complicit in the scheme. Federal prosecutors were reportedly building a case that could result in charges of conspiracy, money laundering, and fraud, crimes that carried potential sentences of decades in federal prison. "This can't be right," Amina said, reading the article again more carefully. "The man I know wouldn't do something like this. But Mom, you don't really know him that well, do you? I mean, you've had some conversations, but how much can you really know about someone's business dealings?" The question stung because it contained an uncomfortable truth. Her understanding of Karim was based on late-night discussions about literature and philosophy, glimpses of vulnerability shared in the quiet intimacy of the hotel lobby, and her impression of his character during personal interactions. But she knew virtually nothing about his business practices, his financial dealings, or the complex world of international real estate development. Her phone rang as she was wrestling with these doubts, and David Davidson's voice carried a tension she had rarely heard from the usually calm hotel manager. "Amina, I need you to come in early today. We have a situation developing with Mr. Al-Hussein's reservation, and I want to discuss how we're going to handle the publicity." The situation became clear as soon as she arrived at the Grand Meridian. News vans lined the street outside, reporters clustered around the main entrance, and photographers with long-lens cameras were positioned across the street, hoping to capture images of Karim if he attempted to leave the hotel. The normally serene lobby buzzed with tension as staff members tried to maintain normal operations while managing the media attention. "The story went national about 3 hours ago," Davidson explained as they met in his office. "CNN picked it. Up then the other networks followed. Mr. Al-Hussein's extended stay here has apparently become part of the narrative. Some reporters are suggesting he was hiding out in Seattle to avoid federal investigators. That's ridiculous. He extended his stay to deal with his business partner's embezzlement, not to hide from investigators." "You seem very certain about his motivations." The comment carried an undertone that made Amina look at her manager more closely. Davidson's expression was carefully neutral, but she could sense questions and concerns that went beyond professional management of a publicity crisis. "I've spoken with him several times during my shifts. He seemed genuinely shocked and hurt by his partner's betrayal. Amina, I need to ask this directly. How close have you become to Mr. Al-Hussein during his stay here?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications about professional boundaries, personal judgment, and the potential complications of a hotel employee becoming emotionally involved with a guest who was now the subject of a federal criminal investigation. "We've had some conversations," she said carefully. "Nothing inappropriate, nothing that violated hotel policies. But more than the usual guest services? Yes, more than usual." Davidson was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with how to handle a situation that had no precedent in the hotel's employee handbook. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I'm not going to tell you how to conduct your personal life, Amina. You're an adult, and your work here has always been exemplary. But I need you to understand that this investigation could become very complicated very quickly. If federal prosecutors believe Mr. Al-Hussein was complicit in financial crimes, anyone associated with him could potentially face scrutiny." "Ah, you suggesting I distance myself from him?" "I'm suggesting you be very careful about decisions that could affect your career and your son's future. Sometimes the smart choice is to step back from situations that are beyond our control or understanding." The conversation left Amina feeling unsettled and confused. Everything she thought she knew about Karim, his character, his integrity, his genuine remorse for his initial behavior, suddenly seemed cast in doubt. Was she naive to trust her personal impressions over federal investigators' findings? Had she allowed her growing feelings for him to cloud her judgment about his true nature? That evening, when she arrived for her shift, she found the hotel lobby transformed into something resembling a fortress under siege. Additional security personnel had been hired to manage the media presence, and all staff had been briefed on protocols for dealing with reporters' questions. The usual elegant atmosphere had been replaced by an undercurrent of tension that affected everyone from guests to housekeeping staff. Karim appeared in the lobby around 11 p.m., looking haggard in a way she had never seen before. His usually perfect appearance showed signs of strain. Wrinkled shirt, disheveled hair, and most notably, eyes that carried the kind of exhaustion that came from betrayal and fear rather than simple fatigue. He approached the front desk with obvious reluctance, as if he knew the conversation they were about to have would be difficult for both of them. "I suppose you've seen the news," he said without preamble. "Yes. And I suppose you have questions about what's true and what isn't." "I do." He gestured toward their usual seating area, but she hesitated. Being seen in extended private conversation with him now felt different than it had just 24 hours earlier, potentially compromising in ways that could affect not just her job, but her reputation and her son's future. "Perhaps we should keep this brief," she said. Given the circumstances, the words clearly stung him, but he nodded, understanding. The charges being suggested are false, Amina. Rashid, my partner, has been systematically stealing from our joint ventures for at least 3 years. I discovered the theft 2 months ago, which is why I've been traveling constantly, trying to trace the missing funds and understand the scope of the damage. But the investigators seem to think you were involved. The investigators are following a paper trail that Rashid deliberately constructed to implicate me. He knew that if his theft was discovered, he would need someone else to blame. So he forged documents, created false communications, and set up financial structures that make it appear I was complicit in his crimes. How can you prove that? I'm working with attorneys and forensic accountants to trace the real financial flows and demonstrate how the false evidence was created. But these investigations take time, and meanwhile, my reputation is being destroyed by media coverage that assumes guilt based on accusations. Amina studied his face, looking for signs of deception or evasion. What she saw instead was genuine anguish, not just at being falsely accused, but at the prospect that people he cared about might believe he was capable of such betrayal. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Something that makes this situation more complicated than just financial crimes." "What?" "Marcus's college applications, the scholarship fund I mentioned setting up in Layla's memory. I've been transferring money from my personal accounts to establish the endowment. But now that all my assets are under scrutiny, those transfers could be misinterpreted as attempts to hide money from investigators." The implication hit her immediately. If prosecutors were looking for evidence that Karim had been moving money to avoid detection, his generous gesture toward Marcus's education could be twisted into something that looked like money laundering or asset concealment. "Oh God," she whispered, understanding suddenly how their personal connection could become entangled in his legal troubles. "I wanted to tell you before you heard it from someone else, and I wanted to assure you that I will do everything necessary to ensure that you and Marcus are completely protected from any complications arising from my situation." "What does that mean?" "It means that if my association with you becomes problematic for your job, for Marcus's future, for any aspect of your lives, I will remove myself from the situation completely. I care about you both too much to let my troubles damage your futures." As she looked at this man who had become so important to her and Marcus over the past month, Amina faced a choice that would define not just their relationship, but her own character. She could protect herself by stepping away, accepting the safe assumption that where there was smoke, there must be fire. Or she could trust her instincts about his integrity and stand by someone who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, even knowing the potential cost of that loyalty. The decision to stand by Karim wasn't made in a single moment of dramatic revelation, but rather through a series of small choices over the following days that gradually revealed to Amina the depth of her own convictions about loyalty, character, and the difference between legal accusations and personal truth. The first test came the next morning when she arrived home to find Marcus reading coverage of the scandal on his laptop, his expression troubled in a way that immediately caught her attention. "Mom, some of the kids at school are saying stuff about Mr. Al-Hussein, about the investigation and—" He paused, clearly struggling with how to phrase something delicate. "About you? What kind of things are they saying about me?" "That you're involved with him. That maybe you knew about the money stuff, that you might get in trouble too." Marcus's voice carried the protective anger of a teenage son defending his mother's reputation. "I told them they were idiots, but you're worried about what this means for our family." "I'm worried about you, Mom. What if people really believe you were involved in something illegal? What if the hotel fires you? What if this affects your background check for other jobs?" The practical concerns Marcus raised were exactly the ones that had been keeping Amina awake during what should have been her sleeping hours. Working in hospitality required maintaining an impeccable reputation. Any association with criminal activity, even false accusations, could effectively end her career in an industry where trust and discretion were paramount. But as she looked at her son's worried face, she realized that her response to this crisis would teach him more about character and integrity than any number of philosophical discussions about doing the right thing when it was difficult. Marcus, what do you think about Mr. Al-Hussein, based on your own interactions with him, not on what other people are saying? I think he's a good man who's been betrayed by someone he trusted. I think he genuinely cares about us, and I think he's being set up by his business partner. Marcus paused, then continued with the kind of clarity that sometimes came from teenagers who hadn't yet learned to compromise their instincts. I also think you care about him more than you're admitting, and that walking away from someone you care about just because it's convenient isn't the kind of person you taught me to be. The wisdom in her son's words struck her with unexpected force. For years, she had been teaching Marcus about integrity, loyalty, and standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Now he was reminding her to apply those same principles to her own life. The second test came later that day, when David Davidson called her into his office for another conversation about the developing situation. This time, his demeanor carried the formal distance that suggested he was speaking as her employer rather than as the supportive mentor who had promoted her from housekeeping 3 years earlier. Amina, I've been asked by the hotel's corporate attorneys to discuss your continued employment here in light of your association with Mr. Al-Hussein. Asked by whom? The corporate office. They're concerned about potential liability issues if it becomes known that one of our employees has been having a personal relationship with a guest who's under federal investigation. I haven't violated any hotel policies. I know you haven't. This isn't about policy violations. This is about public perception and potential legal complications. The attorneys are recommending that we transfer you to another property in the chain, at least temporarily, until Mr. Al-Hussein's situation is resolved. The offer was presented as a lateral move rather than a demotion. Same pay, same benefits, but at a hotel across the city where her commute would be longer and her connection to the scandal less obvious. It was, she realized, the company's way of protecting both her and themselves while maintaining plausible distance from the controversy. And if I decline the transfer? Davidson's expression became genuinely sad. Then I might not be able to protect your position here if the media attention continues to escalate. That evening, Amina found herself walking through downtown Seattle instead of taking the bus directly home, needing time to process the impossible choice she was being forced to make. The city streets were busy with the usual mix of commuters, tourists, and evening entertainment seekers, all moving through their lives with the kind of purpose that seemed to have temporarily deserted her own life. She found herself standing in front of the grand Meridian, looking up at the building that had been her professional home for 3 years and might not be much longer. Through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the evening shift going about their usual duties, managing the complex choreography of luxury hospitality that she had been part of until very recently. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Karim. I know you're facing pressure because of your association with me. Please don't let loyalty to someone you barely know jeopardize everything you've built. I would understand completely if you decided to distance yourself from this situation. The message revealed both his consideration for her welfare and his assumption that she would make the practical choice to protect herself. What it didn't reveal was any understanding of how important he had become to her, or how walking away from him now would feel like a betrayal of everything she believed about standing by people during their darkest moments. Instead of responding to his text, she found herself calling Marcus. Mom, is everything okay? I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If I make a choice that could cost me my job, affect our financial security, and potentially complicate your college applications, would you support that choice if you believed it was morally right? Mom, what's happening? The hotel wants to transfer me to avoid association with Karim's legal troubles. If I refuse, I might get fired. If I accept, I feel like I'm abandoning someone who has shown us nothing but kindness and respect. Marcus was quiet for so long that she wondered if the call had been dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a maturity that reminded her how much he had grown over the past few years. Remember when I was in 8th grade and Tommy Reeves was being bullied by those older kids? You told me that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, and that's how you know it's really right. I remember. Well, this sounds like one of those times. And Mom, we've survived worse things than job uncertainty. We'll figure out whatever comes next, just like we always have. The third test came that night when she arrived at work to find the hotel lobby transformed yet again. The media presence had intensified, with satellite trucks now parked along the street and reporters doing live broadcasts from the sidewalk outside. Hotel security had been forced to create a separate entrance for employees to avoid the chaos at the main entrance, but the most significant change was in the atmosphere among the staff. Where there had previously been curiosity and mild concern about the scandal, she now sensed something different, a careful distance that suggested her colleagues had been instructed to avoid unnecessary association with her while the situation remained unresolved. The isolation was subtle but unmistakable. Conversations that would normally have included her now stopped when she approached. Colleagues who usually shared coffee and gossip during break times suddenly had urgent tasks that required their attention elsewhere. Even James Morrison, the security supervisor, who had always treated her with warm collegiality, now limited their interactions to strictly professional exchanges. At 11:30, she made a decision that surprised her with its clarity and certainty. She walked to David Davidson's office and knocked on the door, knowing he often worked late when the hotel was dealing with challenging situations. "Amina, I wasn't expecting to see you tonight. I wanted to give you my answer about the transfer. And I'm declining the transfer. And I'm also submitting my resignation, effective in 2 weeks." Davidson's expression showed genuine shock. "Amina, that's not necessary. The transfer is a reasonable compromise that protects everyone." "It's not about what's reasonable. It's about what's right. I'm not going to let fear of consequences prevent me from supporting someone who has shown me nothing but respect and kindness. And I'm not going to work for an organization that asks me to compromise my principles for the sake of avoiding difficult conversations." "You're making a mistake. This scandal will pass, but good jobs are hard to find." "Maybe, but self-respect is harder to find once you've lost it." As she walked back to the front desk to begin what would be one of her final shifts at the Grand Meridian, Amina felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the particular kind of peace that came from making a difficult decision based on principle rather than practicality. She had no idea what she would do for work in 2 weeks, how she would manage their household expenses during a period of unemployment, or how her choice would ultimately affect Marcus's college plans. But she knew with absolute certainty that she could live with the consequences of standing by her convictions in a way she couldn't have lived with the consequences of abandoning them. At midnight, when Karim appeared in the lobby, looking exhausted and defeated, she was ready to have the conversation that would determine the future of their relationship and possibly both their lives. "I heard about your resignation," he said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her usual spot. "Amina, you can't sacrifice your career for someone you've known for less than 2 months." "I'm not sacrificing my career for you," she replied calmly. "I'm protecting my integrity for me." There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're destroying your financial security to make a point about loyalty to someone who might not deserve it. Do you deserve it? The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to determine whether she was asking as someone who already knew the answer or someone who genuinely needed to hear it. I deserve your loyalty to the person you've come to know through our conversations, he said finally. I don't know if I deserve loyalty to someone facing the kind of accusations being made against me by federal prosecutors. Those are two different people. Maybe they are. Maybe the person I've been with you, thoughtful, vulnerable, trying to rebuild his life after losing his wife. Maybe that person is just a performance I created to escape the reality of who I actually am in my business dealings. Do you believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore when people you've trusted for years are willing to destroy your reputation to protect themselves, when federal agents are treating you like a criminal based on evidence you know is fabricated, when even your own attorneys sometimes look at you like they're wondering if you're telling them the truth. After a while, you start questioning your own understanding of reality. Amina leaned forward, studying his expression with the kind of careful attention she usually reserved for Marcus when he was struggling with something important. Karim, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I've spent the last month getting to know you through conversations about literature, philosophy, your late wife's memory, and your genuine concern for my son's future. Those conversations revealed character traits that can't be performed or fabricated over time. Either you're a sociopathic manipulator who spent weeks creating an elaborate false personality for reasons I can't imagine, or you're exactly the kind of decent, complicated, grieving man you've appeared to be. And which do you believe? We believe you're being framed by someone who knows you well enough to make the frame convincing. And I believe you're letting fear and isolation cloud your judgment about your own character. Even if that's true, standing by me could cost you everything: your job, your reputation, Marcus's college opportunities. Marcus got his acceptance letter from University of Washington yesterday, she interrupted. Full scholarship, plus a work-study position that will cover his living expenses. Apparently, his application was so impressive that they created a special academic merit package for him. Karim's expression shifted from confusion to realization, to something that looked almost like guilt. Amina, you arranged the scholarship, didn't you? Even knowing that your legal troubles could make any financial assistance look suspicious, you made sure Marcus would be able to attend college regardless of what happened to you or to our family's circumstances. I couldn't let your loyalty to me destroy his future, which proves everything I needed to know about your character. Someone who commits financial crimes doesn't anonymously arrange scholarships for the children of people who might get hurt by association with them. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of mutual understanding settling between them. Finally, Karim spoke, his voice carrying a vulnerability she had rarely heard from him. My attorneys say the investigation could take months to resolve. Even if I'm eventually cleared of all charges, the damage to my business relationships and reputation might be permanent. I'm probably going to lose most of my wealth, definitely going to lose most of my professional connections. And how does that make you feel? Terrified and strangely relieved. Relieved? I built my entire identity around business success, accumulating wealth, wielding influence in international markets. Since Layla died, those things have felt increasingly meaningless, but I didn't know how to step away from them without losing my sense of who I was. And now I might not have a choice about stepping away from them, which means I might finally have the opportunity to discover who I am when I'm not defined by my net worth or business achievements. Amina found herself smiling for the first time in days. That sounds like something Layla might have said to you. She would have. She used to say that losing everything material was sometimes the only way people found everything essential. Smart woman, the smartest. And I think she would have approved of you, which is not something I could say about many people I've met since her death. As the conversation continued past 1 a.m., then past 2, they found themselves discussing not just the immediate crisis, but longer-term questions about identity, purpose, and the possibility of building meaningful lives from the rubble of circumstances. Beyond their control, I need to tell you something, Amina said finally, about why I really resigned from the hotel. I assume it was because they were pressuring you to distance yourself from me. Partly, but mostly it was because I realized I've been living a smaller life than I need to live. I've been so focused on security and stability that I forgot about the possibility of growth and change. What does that mean? It means I want to go back to school, finish my doctoral work, maybe teach, maybe work in international relations, maybe find some way to use my languages and cultural knowledge to build bridges between communities that misunderstand each other. That sounds wonderful. And expensive. Very expensive. Which is why I've been afraid to even consider it seriously. But watching you face the possibility of losing everything material while discovering what really matters has made me realize that some risks are worth taking, even if it means years of financial struggle while you're in school. Even then, Marcus will be in college, building his own life. This might be the perfect time for me to take risks I couldn't take when he was younger and more dependent on my stability. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside the lobby windows, they were both aware that they had reached some kind of turning point, not just in their relationship, but in their individual understanding of what they wanted their lives to become. I have one more thing to tell you, Karim said, pulling a legal document from his briefcase. My attorneys found evidence that could clear me of all charges, but using it would require returning to Dubai to testify against Rashid in person. That sounds like good news. It is good news legally, but it would mean leaving Seattle for several months, possibly permanently depending on how the legal proceedings unfold. The implication hung in the air between them, that just as they had discovered the depth of their feelings for each other, circumstances were threatening to separate them indefinitely. When would you have to leave? She asked quietly. Within the week. The Dubai authorities want to begin proceedings as soon as possible, and my presence there would strengthen the case significantly. Then we don't have much time. Time for what? To figure out if what we've found together is worth fighting for, or if it's just two people helping each other through a difficult period. As the morning shift began arriving at the hotel and their private time together drew to a close, both Amina and Karim faced the realization that the next few days would determine not just the resolution of his legal troubles, but the direction of both their lives going forward. The rain had returned to Seattle with the kind of persistence that seemed designed to match the emotional weight of what would likely be Karim and Amina's final evening together before his departure. 3 days had passed since their dawn conversation. In the lobby, 3 days during which they had both struggled with the reality that timing, that most unforgiving of life's variables, had conspired to separate them just as they had discovered how much they meant to each other. Karim's flight to Dubai was scheduled for the following afternoon. His legal team had arranged for him to testify before a tribunal that would hear evidence about Rashid's embezzlement and the fabricated documents designed to implicate Karim in crimes he hadn't committed. The testimony could clear his name completely, but it would require him to remain in Dubai for an indefinite period while the case moved through the UAE's legal system. Amina had worked her final shift at the Grand Meridian the night before, accepting the congratulations and well wishes of colleagues who still didn't fully understand why she had chosen principle over job security. David Davidson had made one last attempt to convince her to reconsider the transfer option, but she had remained firm in her decision to leave on her own terms. Now, as she sat in the hotel lobby for what might be the last time, she found herself, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 months ago, she had been a single mother working night shifts and limiting her dreams to what seemed practically achievable. Karim had been a wealthy businessman hiding from grief behind arrogance and constant travel. Tonight, they were two, people who had discovered unexpected depths in each other and in themselves, facing a separation that felt both inevitable and heartbreaking. "I brought something to show you," Karim said, settling into the chair that had become his customary spot across from her. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small digital recorder, the kind used for business meetings and legal depositions. "What is it?" "Something Layla recorded for me during her final week in the hospital. I haven't been able to listen to it since she died, but last night—" He paused, his voice catching slightly. "Last night I finally felt strong enough. You don't have to share this with me if it's too personal. I want to. I need to, actually. Because what she says relates to you, to us, to the choice I'm facing about leaving Seattle." He placed the recorder on the small table between their chairs and pressed play. The voice that emerged was weak, but unmistakably warm, carrying the kind of love that transcended physical limitation. "My darling Karim," the recording began, "if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone, and you're trying to figure out how to continue living without me. First, let me say that I'm not really gone. I'm in every book we read together, every garden we planted, every moment of kindness you show to people who need it." Amina felt tears gathering in her eyes as she listened to this intimate message from a woman she had never met but had come to admire through Karim's stories. "I know you, Habibti. I know you'll try to honor my memory by keeping yourself frozen, in grief, by refusing to let anyone else into the space in your heart that you think belongs only to me. But that's not how love works. And that's not what I want for you." Karim's hand moved to the recorder as if he might stop the playback, but Amina reached across and gently covered his fingers with hers, encouraging him to let the message continue. Love isn't a finite resource that gets used up when you give it to someone. Love is like light. It grows brighter when it's shared and dimmer when it's hidden away. If you find someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself, someone who challenges you to grow beyond the limitations of grief and fear, don't let practical concerns or fear of betraying my memory prevent you from embracing that gift. The recording paused, and they could hear the sound of medical equipment in the background, the quiet bustle of a hospital room where someone was preparing to say goodbye to life and the person she loved most in the world. "I want you to promise me something," Layla's voice continued. "Promise me that you won't let the idea of honoring our love become an excuse for avoiding new love. Promise me that you'll recognize happiness when it appears in your life, even if it comes in unexpected forms or at inconvenient times." Karim reached across and took Amina's hand, intertwining their fingers as they listened to his late wife's final gift to him. "And one more thing, my love. When you do find someone worth fighting for, don't let fear or practical concerns keep you from fighting. Some things are worth taking risks for, worth making sacrifices for, worth changing your entire life for. Love, real love, is one of those things." The recording ended with soft words in Arabic that Amina understood. "I love you always, and I want you to love again." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Layla's wisdom settling over them like a benediction. Finally, Karim spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. "She recorded that message 6 months before she died, when she was still strong, enough to think clearly about what she wanted to tell me. I think she knew that I would need permission to move forward with my life." "It sounds like she knew you very well." "She did. And I think she would have understood what I'm about to ask. Which is, come with me to Dubai." The request hung in the air between them, like a bridge that could either connect two lives or collapse under the weight of practical impossibilities. Amina stared at Karim, trying to process not just his words, but the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "Come with you to Dubai," she repeated, as if saying the words aloud might help them make more sense. "I know how it sounds. I know it seems impulsive and impractical and probably insane. But Amina, I can't walk away from what we've discovered together, and I can't ask you to wait indefinitely for legal proceedings that might take years to resolve. Karim, I have responsibilities here, commitments. Marcus will be starting at University of Washington in the fall, completely financially secure thanks to his scholarship. You've resigned from your job. You were talking about going back to school, about taking risks to build a more meaningful life, but moving to Dubai. That's not taking a risk. That's jumping off a cliff without knowing if there's water below. There's water below, he said with quiet conviction. I can't promise it will be comfortable or familiar, but I can promise you won't drown. She stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city that had been her home for over a decade, the place where she had raised Marcus and built a modest but stable life from nothing. The idea of leaving all of that behind for the uncertainty of a relationship that was still so new felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. What would I do there? I don't speak Arabic well enough for professional work in the Middle East. I don't have any connections or credentials that would transfer to international business. You speak classical Arabic beautifully, which is more than most Western expatriates can claim. You have a graduate degree in Middle Eastern studies and comparative linguistics. Dubai is an international city that bridges Eastern and Western cultures, exactly the kind of place where your knowledge and skills would be invaluable. In what capacity? Cultural consulting, translation work, educational program development, diplomatic liaison services. There are dozens of organizations that need people who understand both worlds and can help build bridges between them. She turned back to face him, and he continued with growing enthusiasm as he outlined possibilities he had clearly been thinking about extensively. The UAE is investing billions in educational initiatives and cultural exchange programs. They need people who can help design curricula that honor Arabic traditions while engaging with global perspectives. You could teach, consult, maybe even finish your doctoral work at the American university there. And what happens between us while I'm figuring out my career in a completely foreign country? We figure that out together. Day by day, conversation by conversation, the same way we've been figuring it out here. Except there, I would be completely dependent on you. No job, no friends, no family support system, no financial independence. That's not a relationship, Karim. That's a very expensive form of emotional caretaking. Her words stung because they contained truth he hadn't fully considered. In his eagerness to find a solution that would allow them to stay together, he had overlooked the power dynamics that would inevitably arise if she followed him to Dubai without her own resources or professional identity. "You're right," he said, quietly. "I was thinking like someone who's always had the luxury of making decisions without worrying about financial security. That was thoughtless." It wasn't thoughtless. It was generous. But generosity isn't enough to build a healthy relationship. They sat in silence for several minutes, both struggling with the apparent impossibility of their situation. Two people who had found something rare and precious together, separated by circumstances that seemed designed to test whether their connection was strong enough to survive practical obstacles. "What if we approached this differently?" Amina said. "Finally, what if, instead of me following you to Dubai, we both committed to building something together that could survive geographic separation?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I use this time to go back to school here, finish my doctorate, establish my own professional credentials in international cultural relations, And what if you use your time in Dubai to clear your legal troubles and figure out what kind of life you want to build after you're no longer defined by your business empire? A long-distance relationship while we both rebuild our lives from scratch. A partnership where we both become the people we're capable of being, with the understanding that if we're really meant to be together, we'll find a way to make the geography work once we're both standing on solid ground. Karim considered her proposal, recognizing the wisdom in it, even as part of him rebelled against the idea of more separation and uncertainty. How long are we talking about? 6 months? A year? However long it takes. Maybe I finish my doctorate, and we discover opportunities for me to work in Dubai that don't require me to be dependent on your connections. Maybe you clear your name and decide you want to relocate your business operations to the Pacific Northwest. Maybe we find some third option we haven't thought of yet. And in the meantime, we trust what we've found together, enough to believe it can survive the test of time and distance. Outside the hotel windows, dawn was beginning to lighten the Seattle sky, marking the end of their last night together and the beginning of an uncertain journey that would either prove or disprove the strength of their connection. "I have something for you," Karim said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet box. "Not what you might think," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "Something else?" 15 months later, the Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom had been transformed into something that perfectly captured the blending of two cultures and two hearts that had found their way to each other through patience, faith, and the kind of love that grows stronger when tested by time and distance. Amina stood before the mirror in the bridal suite, adjusting the delicate gold jewelry that had belonged to Karim's mother and grandmother, pieces that carried the weight of family history and the blessing of women who had loved deeply across cultures and continents. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of cultural fusion. Traditional white silk cut in classic Western lines, but embroidered with intricate Arabic calligraphy that spelled out verses from Rumi about the union of souls. The past 15 months had unfolded in ways neither she nor Karim could have predicted when they said goodbye in the hotel lobby that rainy morning. His legal troubles had been resolved more quickly than anticipated. Within 6 months, Rashid's scheme had been fully exposed, stolen funds recovered, and Karim's reputation completely restored. But instead of immediately returning to Seattle, he had used the experience as an opportunity to completely reimagine his business focus. "You look radiant," said Maria Santos, her former colleague from the hotel's housekeeping department, who had become one of her closest friends during the months of separation and reunion, like someone who waited for exactly the right person and exactly the right moment. "I feel like I'm dreaming," Amina replied, touching the simple pendant at her throat, a gift from Marcus, inscribed with a quote from her grandfather. "The heart that loves is always young." Through the suite's windows, she could see guests arriving for the ceremony. Karim's family from Dubai mingled with her friends from Seattle. Marcus served as unofficial host to visitors who spoke a dozen different languages, and hotel staff who had witnessed their unlikely love story bustled about with the satisfaction of people who had played supporting roles in a romance that had defied practical expectations. The transformation in both their lives had been remarkable. Amina had not only completed her doctoral dissertation, a groundbreaking analysis of how cultural misunderstandings in international business could be prevented through better linguistic and cultural education, but had also established herself as a sought-after consultant for companies doing business across cultural divides. Her first major contract had come through the Cultural Center, where she and Karim had spent many of their early dates, leading to partnerships with tech companies, international non-profits, and eventually the State Department's cultural exchange programs. The work was intellectually fulfilling in ways she had forgotten were possible, and financially rewarding enough to give her the independence she had always craved. Karim's transformation had been equally dramatic. Instead of rebuilding his previous business empire, he had used his restored wealth and reputation to create something entirely new, a foundation focused on educational exchanges between Middle Eastern and Western institutions, with particular emphasis on programs that gave young people from both cultures the opportunity to study and work across traditional boundaries. The Foundation's flagship program provided full scholarships for promising students like Marcus, who had spent his junior year studying engineering at the American University in Dubai and was now fluent in both Arabic and the kind of cross-cultural communication skills that would serve him throughout his career. "Mom, they're ready for you," Marcus said, appearing in the doorway looking handsome and proud in his role as the man who would walk her down the aisle. At 19, he had grown into the kind of thoughtful, confident young man she had always hoped he would become, with his father's height and her eyes, but something uniquely his own in his perspective on the world. "How do I look?" she asked, smoothing the dress one final time, like the smartest woman I know, who finally decided to let herself be as happy as she deserves to be. As they made their way through the hotel corridors toward the ballroom, Amina reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The separation had been difficult, months of video calls, carefully planned visits, and the constant uncertainty about whether love could really survive the practical challenges of building lives on different continents, but it had also been necessary. During those months apart, she had rediscovered her intellectual confidence, established her professional identity, and learned to trust her own judgment in ways that years of single motherhood and financial struggle had made difficult to maintain. When Karim had finally returned to Seattle permanently 8 months ago, he had found not the dependent woman who might have followed him to Dubai out of emotional necessity, but an equal partner who had chosen to build a life with him from a position of strength rather than need. The ballroom doors opened, and she saw him waiting for her at the altar, handsome as ever, but more importantly, radiating the kind of peace that came from someone who had found his purpose and his person simultaneously. His eyes filled with tears as he saw her approaching, and she felt her own heart swell with the certainty that this moment, this choice, this love, was exactly what both their lives had been leading toward. The ceremony was conducted by an imam, who spoke in both Arabic and English, honoring both their cultural traditions while creating something new that belonged specifically to them. When they exchanged vows, Amina spoke first in Arabic, then English, while Karim did the reverse, their words interweaving like the calligraphy on her dress. "I promise to love you, not in spite of our differences, but because of them," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, filled with people from dozens of countries and cultures. "I promise to build with you a life that honors both our histories and creates new possibilities for our future." "I promise to support your dreams, even when they seem impossible," Karim replied, "and to remember that the best partnerships are between people who make each other braver, kinder, and more themselves than they ever imagined they could be." When the Imam pronounced them married, the celebration that followed was a testament to the power of love to build bridges across any divide. The hotel staff who had watched their romance unfold served food that reflected both their cultures. Musicians played everything from traditional Arabic songs to contemporary jazz, and guests danced together who might never have met without this union to bring them together. As the evening wound down, Amina and Karim found themselves alone in the hotel lobby, where they had first discovered each other's depths during those late-night conversations that had changed both their lives forever. "Any regrets?" he asked, pulling her close as they swayed to music that drifted from the ballroom. "Only that it took us so long to find each other," she replied. But maybe we both needed to become who we are now before we could recognize what we had found. Grandfather Khalil would be proud of you, he said, and she knew he meant not just of the wedding, but of the journey that had brought her to this moment of joy. Layla would be proud of you too, she replied, for keeping your promise to stay, open to love. As they danced in the space where they had first clashed, then connected, then committed to building something beautiful together, Seattle sparkled outside the windows like a city celebrating their happiness. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities neither could have imagined when they were simply two people trying to maintain their dignity in the face of life's unexpected challenges. Sometimes the smallest moments do carry the greatest power to change everything. Sometimes one person's refusal to be diminished can remind everyone around them what dignity really looks like. And sometimes, when two hearts find each other across the divide of different worlds, they discover that grace, especially when hard-earned, really can disarm even the most hardened souls and create love stories that become legends in the places where they began.